Okay, hello again. So I am Richard de la Riviere and I've written this book on Liverpool FC, the Premier League years. Sales are going very well, but still got a few more to shift, so I'm going to do a few more videos about it. I thought I would do a video today on the Souness years. Obviously, that's a very interesting subject to get stuck into. There's an awful lot there. Before I do, though, I just really want to thank the guys at Red all over the land. Brilliant Liverpool fanzine who have carried on going throughout the lockdown. Obviously, there's no fans at games for them to sell to, but they've carried on producing a brilliant fanzine, and they've written a really nice piece about my book recommending people to buy it. So I just want to thank them for that and to encourage people to support their fanzine. So yeah, I thought I would. I said in my last video I would do a few more, and I thought maybe I would just go through the managers one at a time. So obviously that's starting at Souness and going all the way through to Jurgen Klopp. Obviously, as my book covers the Premier League years. Now, obviously with Souness, there's the negatives easily outweigh the positives. In fact, there barely were any positives. It was a nightmare 2.5 years that Graham had in charge of Liverpool. It's difficult though looking back, because I kind of felt a little bit bad, pointing all the stuff out that he did wrong, because he's a Liverpool legend. I know people who actually think he's not just Liverpool's greatest captain, but perhaps he's Liverpool's greatest ever player. I know a lot of Reds who's regard him as a better midfielder than Gerrard, for example, and that is very, very high praise. He obviously loved the club, but he came in, he was young, he was too impulsive, and he made an awful lot of mistakes. I think at the time, though, everybody was pleased that we got him. I mean, the Liverpool tradition was to appoint from within, or in this case, appoint someone who knew the club inside out. It was only 7 years earlier that he'd captained the club to the fourth European Cup in his last game. So nobody was really complaining when we got him, and he'd done a reasonable job at Rangers. He'd won titles and cups at Ibrox. I do remember, though, in the fanzine Through the Wind and Rain, I remember a writer writing in to say that it actually might not work out. He's a very impulsive guy, and he makes mistakes, and he goes at things too quickly. And if you Google Graham Souness and Aggie Moffat, you'll read the hilarious story of the tea lady that he came up against one night when he'd thrown cups of tea all around the dressing room, and this lady came and asked him to clear it all up, and he lost his temper with her, and he got into trouble for that. But Graham came in April 1991 and set about probably making changes too quickly. I mean, getting rid of Peter Beardsley and bringing in Dean Saunders is the classic mistake that we remember him for. People point out that the squad was ageing, that there was only really John Barnes that was world class. I think that's a bit harsh on a few other players, though, but injuries to McMahon and Whelan towards the end of Dalglish's days had certainly weakened the team a lot. And of course, Alan Hansen didn't play again after the last title triumph in 1990. So there was certainly a lot of work for Graham to do. My book obviously starts in the summer of 92, though, so it doesn't cover the 91-92 season. So there was still, when I pick up the book, there was still the fallout for him doing that interview with the Sun newspaper on the 3rd anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster. Something that he should have been sacked for. I mean, it's incredible that wasn't a sacking offence. The team had also been incredibly mediocre in the 91-92 season. We'd come sixth. We'd won the FA Cup, yes, but it was the easiest FA Cup run in history. In the 6 ties we played, we only had to play one top division team, and that was Villa at Anfield in the quarter-final. We made very heavy weather of Bristol Rovers, Ipswich Town and Portsmouth in the semi-final, came so close to beating us. So as we went into the Premier League years, United had just thrown away the title in hilarious circumstances, losing 3 of their last 4 games. Of course, we all thought that was very funny, and we all thought maybe that would be their only shot at the title and that we'd come back and take it off them. But sadly, that didn't work out. United won their first title in 26 years, and we came 6th again. 92-93 was an absolutely awful season. The signings were David James and Paul Stewart, 2 players that were just ended up being a million miles away from what we wanted. Paul Stewart, of course, had a nightmare Liverpool career, but it transpired many years later that he'd been sexually abused from the age of 11 by a football coach, and that he spent a lot of his time at Liverpool, drinking and taking various drugs. He's written about that in his book, and it's a book that's well worth reading, actually. David James was just far too young and inexperienced and a bit hot-headed and just made far too many mistakes. And it all sort of came to head really in the Chesterfield game. I remember the League Cup match against Chesterfield, in the days where teams still put out their best sides, the bigger teams. not like today. And we were 3-0 down at home to Chesterfield in the first leg of the second round after 50 odd minutes, and eventually managed to turn it around and get a 4-all draw, and we won the second leg 4-1. But the season just didn't get any better. I mean, Spartak Moscow dumped us out of Europe when Grobbelaar got sent off, and then we lost to Bolton Wanderers in the FA Cup, and it just got worse and worse. Souness eventually, we all thought, was going to get the sack in May 1993. He didn't turn up to the final game of the season. We beat Spurs 6-2. It was a real carnival atmosphere. It was the first flag day on the Kop, and everyone was boisterous, thinking that Souness was finally going. Press conference announced for the next day, and then David Moores drops the bombshell that Graham's going to stay. Roy Evans is being promoted to his number 2, and the feeling of despondency I remember very well, that the club just wasn't going anywhere. The summer of '93, in comes Neil Ruddock and Nigel Clough. We were all excited about Nigel Clough, but those two really were no better than Stewart and James. They were bad signings, they cost a lot of money, and just set the team backwards even further. The season started home to Sheffield Wednesday, 2-0 win. We absolutely dominated that day. I remember the atmosphere on the Kop was electric. Nigel Clough got both the goals, everybody singing his name. But if you look at the team that day, there were 6 30-year-olds in the team. There was Mark Walters, who was 29. John Barnes, if he'd been fit, would have been another 30-year-old. Souness had come to the club saying there were too many old players, and yet he'd actually done nothing about that. The average age of the squad increased on his watch. If you go to the lfchistory.net website and just look at the average age for his first game in charge and then compare it to that Sheffield Wednesday game, it increased by a year, the average age. And of course, he also complained that the players weren't fit enough and they weren't looking after themselves, but it was him who signed Neil Ruddock, and it was he who signed Julian Dix as well a couple of months into that season. So, predictably, the wheels began to fall off after a good start. September '93 was an absolute nightmare. I think we lost every game in the league. But the one bright spark, of course, was Robbie Fowler coming into the team when Clough got injured. The start of an absolutely brilliant Liverpool career. Scored on his debut at Craven Cottage in the first leg of a League Cup tie, and then the second leg he scored all 5 in a 5-0 win, and he just never looked back. What an absolute sensation Robbie Fowler was, especially in the first 4 years of his career. But as for Souness, I mean, when we lost another FA Cup tie at Anfield to a lower division team, Bristol City, coming to Anfield and winning a replay 1-0, the writing was obviously on the wall for him then, and it was the end of a pretty miserable, well, it was over 2.5 years. But I've got a lot of fond memories of the 93-94 season, because from a personal point of view, it was the first season where I started going to games regularly. I went to about 2/3 of the home games that season. I was on the Kop every game that I went. You know, you just queued up, paid your money. I remember the fantastic 3-3 draw against Man United. I remember at the time people writing into Through the Wind and Rain saying, you know, why are we celebrating a 3-3 draw at home? But it just felt like United had overtaken us by miles and had left us behind, and it was a pretty miserable time. And to go 3-0 down after 20 minutes to them, those remaining 70 minutes were pretty great, and it was the first genuinely fantastic Anfield experience that I had. An incredible atmosphere on the Kop, the flares, the noise, the flags, especially when Clough made it 3-2 with his second goal, and then Ruddock equalises in the second half. That was just a crazy night. But obviously that was one of Souness's last league games in charge, and the end came from him at the end of January '94. He can only really look back and point to the signing of Rob Jones as a success. He was brave enough to play Robbie Fowler, whereas, you know, however good Fowler might have been in the reserves, a lot of other managers might not have wanted to have picked a young player, and that's just the way the Premier League is. You know, young players don't really get a chance, so a lot of other managers might not have done that. But you can't really point to anything else as a success that he did. His signings were poor. People like McManaman and Barnes, who ended up becoming good players again under Roy Evans, really stank the place out under Souness. As I say, you just had old players that weren't fit. The injury record in the first 2 seasons especially, I mean, you know, you read, I think in Ian Rush's book, he talks about the fact that he just absolutely flogged them in pre-season. And players were just getting injured left, right and centre. I remember at one point something like 7 or 8 players had an Achilles injury early in the Souness years. He really did, unfortunately, just get everything wrong. But like I say, he clearly loves the club, and it's difficult to stick the boot in too much. But obviously I've written a historical account of Liverpool's Premier League years, and you can't rewrite history. You can't just sort of gloss over this stuff and make out that it didn't happen. So the book does cover everything for the Souness years, warts and all, really. I've got all sorts of opinions from other people, quotes from from various journalists and fanzines, and there's a complete record of every single game that goes right through from the summer of '92 to 2020. So it covers all managers, but like I say, I think I'll just do maybe a video a week going through each manager and bringing up some good memories and some bad memories. So anyway, here's the book again. It's on sale on Amazon. It's on eBay as well, actually, if you just search for the title. And if you go to my website, which is richarddelariviere.co.uk, you can read a sample of the first 1,000 words or so of the first chapter, just to get an idea of my style of writing. And there's also a Buy It Now page on there. Okay.